In this video, Will and Sebastian discuss how to debug code. No, you don't need to call an exterminator to debug code. Debugging code usually means that we run and inspect our code step by step until we find that little critter, or error, causing a code to misbehave. Let's meet up with Will and Sebastian as they set themselves up with a simple code that we'll debug.
I'm going to type in this basic program, which is x equals 1, y equals x plus 2, and then I have this little for loop here, which is z equals, open bracket, x, for x in range 0, comma, y plus 1, close parentheses, close bracket. This is just an advanced way of writing a loop. Don't worry about the syntax. I just want to show you how to debug this thing. And then I'm going to have two print statements. So just to run this file, I'm going to right-click on this file, and then I'm going to say run main. So click run main, and you're going to see that my terminal prints something. It printed a little array with the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and then another set of numbers 1 and 3. That's it. So that's what it took to run my file. This is equivalent to me opening a terminal, and in PyCharm down here, I actually have a terminal embedded that already has course 1. I'm already on Mars, and I can just run Python main.py in that terminal. I'm going to get the exact same output. So there are multiple ways of running the file. In the top right of PyCharm, you have a lot of little buttons. This one, play, means run the file. And then this little bug here means debug. We've all been culprits of doing this, where let's just say that I want to understand what the value of y is. So what people do is they're going to type in print y, and then they're going to run their file. And then it's going to say 3, and then they're going to be like, oh no, it was supposed to be 2. So then they go back and change the code, and then they press print again, and then they're like, okay, now it's 2. And then you have print statements everywhere. That's not how we do it. That's a nice way to start, but that's not the best way to debug things. So I'm going to show you some debugging tips so that you don't have to do this archaic way of debugging. Again, I'm going to delete some lines. Again, I'm using Vim just to do a lot of this stuff, so don't get concerned about how this is happening. But basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click next to this little number here, and I'm going to put a little red dot. So this little red dot is called a breakpoint. Then I'm going to click on this little bug icon, and it's going to run my program in an interactive way. So now you see that the code has stopped. So this blue line here is letting me know that the code is stopped. I can see what the value of x is, and I can see what the value of y is as well. Now down here, I can see all the variables. This line of code here, this little for loop, I don't actually know what's going to happen. I mean, I know because I wrote it, but imagine it's a line of code like you're calculating a formula or something, and you don't actually know what's going to happen. That's usually where you would print z and see over and over what it is. I can actually interactively check the result before I do anything, right? So I'm going to just copy paste this code, and then I'm going to just run it into my console. So I click console here, and then I'm just going to paste this, right? And this is kind of like me cheating. It's kind of just let me skip around and run the command and interactively see what's happening. Okay, so I run the command, and I see that I get 0, 1, 2, 3. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted an array that stopped at 2. So now I can go and change my code. So I can press up, and then I can remove this +1. And now I have an array that says 0, 1, 2. Okay, cool. That's awesome. That's kind of what I wanted. Maybe I want my array to only have 2 numbers in it. So it's going to be y minus 1. So it lets me kind of program on the fly, right? I don't have to run the whole program interactively. Just for that one line, I'm done. This is exactly what I want in my code. I'm going to copy it back from the console, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it back into this line. Now I paste the code there, and I'm done. I don't have to go back and print this thing over and over again, right? So to see what happens next, I can stop my debugger, right? And then I move my breakpoints. So I'm going to put the breakpoint now in 6. And you can have multiple breakpoints, by the way. So I'm going to put my breakpoint in 6, and I'm going to press debug. And then it's going to jump the code straight to line 6. And now you see that z is the exact value that I wanted. Let's say that I want to step line by line through the code. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on line 2. And then I'm going to stop my program and start it again. So I press debug. Now my code is at 1. If I want to step through my program line by line, I can now look up here next to the console. There's a few icons. This one says step over, or F8. If I press that, it skips to the next line. So I can go line by line through my program and see how the values are changing over time.
from a perspective of being a coder, things might be overwhelming. And yeah, going step by step, line by line, it's incredibly powerful to conquer things one step at a time. Not trying to solve every problem out there in your code, just inspecting and seeing where it leads you. And sometimes you find bugs that you might not otherwise find by just inspecting things closely and interacting with things.
Hint, if you're doing coding interviews, pretend you're a debugger and go ahead and write the variables on the side as you're doing the coding interview. And then as you check your code, change the variables over time to see how it evolves. And it's actually a really good way to debug your code live on a whiteboard. Now let's go ahead and show you how to change the variables as you're doing the code. So again, I'm going to move my breakpoint and put it on line 3, but then I'm going to hit debug. So now I see that I have x equals 1, and y is going to, in my mind, equal 3, right? So I can actually see what the result is by hovering over. But if I don't want to do that, and I don't want to rerun my program again, I can actually change that by going into my console here. So if I go into the console and I type x, I can see the variable of x is 1. So I can actually set it to something else. So let's say I set it to 10. Now you see that the value changed in memory without me having to restart the program or change the code at all. So now I can go ahead and execute the next line. And because I changed it in my console, now y is 12, not 3. You can actually go through code and interactively debug. This is really, really powerful, especially if you're working on math, physics, statistics, anything like that where there's sampling involved or something, and you want to try different values. Usually, you tend to print a lot of stuff to do that. This is a very straightforward way to figure out what your code is actually going to produce before you actually run it.
And sometimes I run simulations and neural network training that takes multiple days. And yeah, restarting your code every time you want to inspect something, this would be incredibly expensive. So a debugger allows you really to step in the middle of it without like having to rerun everything. So sometimes like these debuggers really also save you a lot of time. It seems like it might be overkill for simple problems, but it's also a good way to practice these things. So I recommend using debuggers consistently because then you are really equipped with the best tools for the task when you need them.
You can also do debugging interactively in the terminal. Remember, these 2 breakpoints don't actually live in your code. The IDE is keeping track of these, PyCharm specifically right now. So I can kind of leave those guys there. And obviously, if I run my Python code here, right? So if I go to terminal and I run that code again, you see that my code executes because I'm not debugging it. So if I want to debug interactively, and this is useful if you're debugging on a server without an IDE, you can use something called PDB. So that's a Python debugger. It's free, open source. So the way I like to do this is in that same line, I just say import PDB and then semicolon. This is completely optional in Python, but it lets you do it in one line. And then I say pdb.set_trace. And now when I run the Python command, you're going to see that my code actually stops there. So the program doesn't actually complete. Now, PDB has a ton of options, so go to the documentation to figure out what you want. But if you type in L, for example, and you press enter, you're actually going to be able to see where in the code you are. There are infinitely many options on how to use PDB, but this is really useful if you want to use debugging actually via the terminal. Again, I only do this in very special occasions, like if I'm doing distributed training across nodes and I need to get into one machine and stop something, but I always debug in the IDE specifically.